Well, good morning, everyone. This is David Malonte. I am the Assistant Director in the Division of School and Program Improvement, and with me on the line is Brenda Considine. She is our new Title I Part A branch manager. Today, what we're going to do is take you through the pages of the Title I Part A application. We wanted to give you a pretty comfortable atmosphere to ask questions. Just a couple of logistics today. What we're going to do is have everybody on mute today. And as you have questions, you can type them in the chat box. Brenda's going to manage that for us. So as questions come in, she'll kind of let us know at the end of each page what questions we have so far. And at that point, at the end of each page, we'll try to address all the questions that exist. With permission from Oldham County, Leslie Robertson in Oldham County, I'm going to be using the test site to go through Oldham County's application with you. And there's probably not a lot in that application at this point. The test is not necessarily live in line with the production site or the real site, but it'll give us an opportunity to see what you all see from your perspectives, and will give us an opportunity to kind of work live through a test version of the application. Brenda, before we get started, is there anything you want to add or say?
Morning, guys. No, I think you covered it, David. If everybody would just make sure that they have their video turned off too, just because it will pull down on everybody being able to hear good audio, I think. And I'll just keep admitting people as they come to the meeting. So thanks for showing up, guys. Appreciate it.
Brenda, can you see the login screen for the test site?
I can.
Perfect. All right. So as you have questions, again, put those in the chat box. We'll try to address those periodically. If there are questions that you're not comfortable asking in front of the group, you can email or call either Brenda or I, and we will help you walk through those individual questions. So at this point, I'm going to log into Oldham County's application, and if you want to follow along in your own live application, that's perfectly okay. If you just want to watch and take notes today, that's perfectly okay too. We are recording this for future reference, so we'll have that posted and notify you where it is posted when we finish up. And what you'll see at this point is I've logged in as the Oldham County Title I Director, and it's going to give us some choices over here in this menu, but what I'm going to do is just click on this Oldham County link. And when I click on that link, it's going to bring up some of the, or all the applications within the system for Oldham County. Now you can go back and take a look at previous years' applications from there. You can look at different versions of those applications, you know, all active, only those that have been approved, or the ones that were last approved in that fiscal year. I'm going to select the consolidated application here. And that's going to bring us up sort of to our landing page, which we call the sections page for the consolidated application. The sections page has a lot of information in it. First of all, at the top of the page, you can see the status of the application. So right now, this application is in revision 0, which means it's the original application. The status right now is not started, and I'm going to try to change this to draft started, which will allow us to do some typing if we need to in the application. And I'll just confirm that. And there we go. We've changed the application status to draft started. Wanted to take some time just before we get into the actual application to go through some of the features of the sections page. So right here is the history log for the consolidated application, and as we sometimes go through the application, we may create a comment which we might give you some feedback on something or make a note of something. And when we do that, it will open up a screen, hopefully, that will allow us to essentially create that message. And if we wanted to send it to a group of people or even to just one person, we could select those people and add them to the message. And to save work on every page, or in this case to send the message, we would hit save and go. And I'm just going to go back to the sections page. Well, maybe. And it's not letting me go there. Let me see if I put in some text here. Oh. Okay, I'm just going to go through from the way I went into the application. The allocations page will allow you to see all your allocations across each program. And for those of you that are using transferability authority, where maybe you're transferring some funds into Title I, this is where you would do it. So you could transfer Title II into Title I, Title IV. And then what would happen is if you did so and you entered an amount in there, this total would adjust here. So if you added Title II funds into Title I, let's say I add 200,000. It shows that 200,000 has come out of Title II into Title I, and it updates your total allocation for the Title I Part A grant. Now, for just right now, I'm going to change that back to 0. Down through the sections page, you'll notice that there's a place where you can see all your contacts within the district, and we can see that from our end as well. There are separate sections for each of the title grants in the consolidated application. There are some assurances for English learners. And then one of the most important things on the checklist or on the sections page is the checklist. We highly encourage you to click on that checklist and either print that off or at least give it a good review, because this checklist includes all the things for each of the sections that our staff will be looking at. And it does include all programs within the consolidated application. So if you scroll through there, you'll see Title II, Title III, Title IV, and so on. You can collapse all the questions at some point if you want to. And over here, you'll see that each of these sections is marked as not reviewed. But as you get some feedback on your application, it might be nice just to be able to collapse that and see where the feedback was provided. Now, feedback is either going to be not reviewed, or it's going to be okay, or it's going to be attention needed. For those ones that are marked attention needed, that is where you would need to focus revisions when you get some feedback. But again, we would highly suggest that you go into the checklist and really take a good look at that, because these are the things that, as our consultants are reviewing the pages, they will be looking to provide feedback about. I'm going to go back to the sections page really quickly and point out a couple other things. The GMAP system does do some validations for us. So what we've done is asked our vendor to put in some validations that are just kind of checkpoints for you at the district level, and then for us as the reviewer. And if you click on, you'll see here all, if you click on all messages, you can see that some of the things here are marked warnings and some of them are marked errors. And most of that is because we haven't put anything into the application at this point. However, if you, before you submit, when you go to kind of look at this page, there are a couple things you need to know. First of all, the warnings are just kind of, hey, look at me, it's a checkpoint. But if you review that checkpoint and everything looks okay, you can submit your application with a warning. Errors, on the other hand, in red, are places where there are some issues, and without fixing those issues first, you will not be able to submit your application. So that's an important checkpoint for you, is to go in and look at the errors and warnings. Also, as you look at the errors and warnings, this one says the Title I Part A contact is 0 contact selected. Well, if you click on review that, it will take you right to the page where you need to fix that particular error. Okay, so just a handy link to get you to the place that needs some attention really quickly. Also, there is a print function on the sections page. This will allow you to print. If you go to all and select print, it will allow you to print a PDF of the entire consolidated application. You can go in and select one section to print, or if you click that box and you select several sections to print, you can do that as well. That could become handy as you're doing revisions and want to have a paper copy in front of you to make notes on. But I will warn you that if you print the entire application section by section, page by page, the PDF that's produced could be 100 pages or more long. So it's kind of would be more efficient to print something by section or just a small piece of something instead of the entire thing. Now, once you select print, this system is actually going to if I were to select print all, it's taking a second to generate. So it's going to tell you what the name of the item being printed is. If you select print, for the entire document, it's going to say generating document for a brief period of time. It's probably not going to bring the gonna have that ready immediately. So once it does generate that document, you should get an email that says, hey, your document is ready to be printed. It'll tell you where it is. I believe it is, yeah, it's going to be in the KDE resources. And if you open the resources, Once that document is generated, it will show up at the top of the KDE resources page. It will give you a link to click on the PDF. You can download it, you can print it, you can save it somewhere if you want to, but just know that this does not automatically send it to the printer for you. So again, back to the sections page, we're going to focus on Title I, Part A today. These are the sections of the Title I, Part A application. Again, your messages in print for that part of the application are over on the right-hand side of the screen. In order to get into the section that you want, you just click on the link. That will take you directly to that page. You can start on any page that you want to start on. So let's say you wanted to start on the budget page, which is out of order. That's perfectly okay. You can start again on any page you want to, complete that page, move on to the next. Okay. And the easy way for this system, the way you move between pages is by using the Go To button. And you go to Title I, Part A, and you can select the page you want to go to, or you can go to previous or next page. But I'm going to go here and go to the first page of the application, and that's kind of where we'll start getting into the meat and potatoes of the application itself. This button allows you to move from page to page, but it also, as you do so, saves your work. So if you try to use the back button, you're going to get a message that says basically you can't go back using the back button. You have to use the Save and Go To button. Also be very aware that this system has a timer on it down on the left-hand side of the screen. That timer, I will caution you not to let it run out. Every time you go from one page to another, that timer resets itself. Or as you go to save and go to the current page, it will reset itself again. But if that timer runs out on you, you will lose a portion of your work. That is just a safety precaution to keep somebody from leaving their screen open all day and somebody come along and start adding some things to the application that shouldn't be there. So periodically we would tell you to go in and at least hit the go to current page button and reset that timer and save your work. Okay. I guess, Brenda, before I move on from the sections page, are there any questions we might have on that page?
David, we had a question about adding additional people in the contact list from the drop-down menu. Is there a way to add others?
Yes, so you should have one person at your district that is able to add contact information for each of the programs, and you should be able to add multiple contacts under each of these programs. We have some districts that want to include their finance officer as part of each one of these contacts potentially, so that if we were to send an email through the comment page, each person would get that. Yeah, I think, there's no designated other, if you will, category, but if you wanted to add multiple people to one of these listings, you can certainly do that. Any other questions, Brenda?
We've had someone has had some trouble printing,
Okay.
and we've made a suggestion to save the PDF and try to send. It sounds like it's a printer problem, but to check with their tech person. They've tried multiple printers and it only prints like a couple of pages.
Okay, and I don't know if that's a setting, like you said, on their end, or if they'll have to go in and select the entire document to print. But yeah, I would recommend going in and talking to your technology folks. I've not had any problems with that, so if I print a section, the entire thing will print. If you keep running into that issue and your tech folks cannot solve that, get in touch with Brenda or I, and we'll try to follow up on what the issue might be.
Okay, one more, David. We had someone who was working in GMAP last week and the timer was not working. It was not counting down.
Okay, and I don't know what that issue might be either. So if you continue to have that issue, let us know and we will get with the vendor. But you can see on my page, it is working at this point. So if you do have an issue with that continually, let us know and we'll get with the vendor on that as well. Any more, Brenda, at this point?
Nope, I think we're good to go on to the next one, next section.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to get into each one of the sections and try to give you some highlights of each one of the sections, some of the important parts, some of the places where people might encounter some hang-ups, and what you can do about some of those things. First thing I want to point out is on every page of the application on the left-hand side of the screen, there is a help for current page. And if you click on that, it should bring up a link for you with just some helpful instructions and hints along the way. So in this case, we've kind of talked about what the first page of the application is. There are 4 required questions within the application that the statute says has to be there in the application. And we've tried to give you a little bit of information about what we might be looking for, what you might want to explain in each of the pages. Some of them you're going to notice that there are multiple help resources, and just to demonstrate that, I'll try to go into a page that might have some multiple resources. Let's try this one. So you'll notice in this page there are 3 help items within the help pages. Just because they were so long and detailed, we kind of separated those out in this instance. But you can click on any of those, and again, we provide you with some definitions in this case for what each of the service selections would be, which should help guide you along the input, data input here, and selection of school program type. So those are very important pieces of each one of the pages that we'd like you to kind of go in and use those as needed. We also take suggestions on those help pages. So if you're on a page and you said, hey, I was working through this section, this part, we are not sure we understand the definition of this particular word or item, we can add to those live, and always take suggestions on those as needed and update them as we go along. So these 4 narrative questions, again, like I said, are required questions in the statute that have to be in the application. The first one is about describing how the plan was developed in consultation with some folks within the district. The second one talks a little bit about how Title I is coordinated with other related programs. The third one talks about how you are facilitating transitions, particularly from middle grades to high school and high school from post-secondary. You can extend that to, say, preschool to kindergarten, middle school. And then the fourth one is about describing how you are working to reduce the overuse of discipline practices that remove children from the classroom, particularly those economically disadvantaged, students from racial and minority groups, children with disabilities, and English learners. Okay. Those are things that we would probably expect to see you having some sort of systems in place that year to year, using those systems to communicate with people or to reduce those practices, discipline practices, or to facilitate transitions. So I would tell you that it's probably okay to copy and paste some things in here and expand as needed. Any questions about this page particularly, Brenda?
No questions at this time.
Okay, anything to add to that?
No, other than if they do copy and paste, just make sure that you update that. You don't want last year's, the 2019-2020 plan referenced in there.
Yeah, or even update data as necessary within
yes.
there. Very good. So the next page in the Title I Part A application is the district set-aside page. Title I Part A allows for the district to keep some of the funds that it receives at the district level for certain activities. You can see these activities listed below. There are some things within this page that are required. Those things are the homeless section. You are required to reserve some funds and describe how you are meeting the needs of homeless children within your district. Some people ask if there's a set formula for this reservation, and there's not. But in the help page, we give you some ideas, and there are 9 items in this help page. We give you some ideas of how to calculate that particular reservation. That reservation could be based on things like history of homelessness within your district, a history of your reservations. You could apply a per pupil amount to calculate the amount for homeless children. So there are several methods to calculate that reservation. A few years ago, we asked US Ed if we could put a minimum limit on that homeless reservation, and they actually told us no. It would have made it easy, but it might not have been equitable for everybody. So in the newest guidance for homeless, they recommended those types of calculations to reserve funding for homeless students. The second potential requirement would be the McKinney-Vento Reservation. If you are a recipient of McKinney-Vento, you have told us that you would supplement that grant with Title I with a particular level of funding. So you would put that level of funding here. Some people might have said within their approved McKinney-Vento application that they were going to put $20,000 per year from Title I to supplement that McKinney grant. I do want to make a point that if you are a McKinney grant recipient, you will have to reserve for homeless in 2 places. In this reservation category and then this supplemental McKinney-Vento category as well. If you do not know if you are a McKinney-Vento grantee, you can go to this page, to the help page. You can select homeless and McKinney-Vento, and then scroll down. And these are our awardees, and the amount here that they said they promised to put in that McKinney-Vento reservation. Okay. McKinney-Vento is a competitive grant. We issue that competitive grant every 3 years. So in the spring or winter or spring of next year, we will be reissuing an RFP for services, and any district is eligible to apply for that grant. We can only award a limited number of those grants because we get approximately $1 million per year for a 3-year grant. And it's just not enough money to fund everyone's needs that have homeless children. So you would notice I think there were maybe 12 grantees or so on that help page that were actually awarded funds. That is, again, not the amount that was awarded to them, but that is the amount that they had promised in their grant to supplement with Title I Part A funds. Another one of the potential required reservations would be the locally operated neglected institutions. And again, you can go back to the help page. If you don't know if you have one, you can open that help page up, select neglected and delinquent institutions. And for those of you that have neglected institutions, it tells you what the institutions are, how much they generated in total. Okay, and then you are required to provide these facility services with that amount generated. Now, here's a little catch with that. The law does not require you to send all those funds or provide services using all those funds for that neglected institution. So, for example, if a district had $25,000 generated by neglected students, however, in consultation with that institution, figure out that only $15,000 of that amount is needed to provide comparable services to the institution, they could reserve only $15,000 here, and the remaining $10,000 generated could go to other allowable Title I activities. So they would enter $15,000 here, describe the types of services that are going to be required, and then however else they decide to use those remaining funds generated by neglected students, they may do so. Another one of the locally operated delinquent institutions is a may reservation. So if you have a delinquent institution, you may, but are not required to provide services to those institutions. But if you did, you'd reserve the amount here and provide a narrative again. Parent and family engagement is a big one. This is required for everyone. Now, there are some catches here. The system is automatically going to reserve an amount for each district. The rule on that is for any district at $500,000 or more in their allocation, they have to reserve 1% of their allocation to provide parent and family engagement services or activities. In this case, you'll notice that Oldham County's allocation was only $400,568. and, excuse me, $456,000. They are not required to reserve this 1%, even though the system automatically calculates for that for you. So if you are a district with an allocation of less than 500,000, you could potentially reduce this to 0. Now it might show you a warning on your sections page, but unless you're $500,000 or more, you are not required to take that reservation. However, the catch is you are still required to describe how you will meet parent and family engagement requirements. So even though you don't reserve the funds, you are still required to carry out activities for parent and family engagement, and we would require a narrative in this section. You know, if you are a district that gets exactly $500,000, it's going to calculate $5,000 for you. You can put more of that, more funding into that particular reservation. So you might want to put $10,000 in this reservation for parent and family engagement, which is perfectly okay. But again, if you're $500,000 or more, you must reserve at least 1% for those activities. Professional development. If you have some district-wide professional development, you can reserve those funds here. Now, if you reserve funds here, just like every other reservation, only Title I schools can benefit from these reservations. A Title I school is a school that actually receives an allocation of Title I funds. So if you served all your schools, all schools could benefit from that professional development reservation. If you serve 3 out of 5 schools, only 3 of those schools receiving an allocation could receive services from these professional development activities. There's a school extension reservation that you could take advantage of. Again, that's not required. It is a may. You can reserve funds for things like before and after school tutoring, intersession activities, summer school, those types of things. You can choose to serve your preschool programs and supplement their activities through district reservations. You can provide additional services to English language learners. Again, not required, but you can reserve funds. We do require an explanation in the English language learners. So if you open that one up, you'll see that we do require some narrative in there, even if you do not reserve funds in that particular area. So this help item would give you an idea of what we would be looking for and give you an explanation of services and things that might be required, or things that you might be able to do with your funding as well.
David, can I interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
Laura has raised her hand, so I'm going to unmute her for a second, okay?
Okay.
Well, it won't let me.
She may have to unmute herself.
Okay. I think I just lost her.
I'm sorry. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I sent the chat.
Okay.
And chat too, but it was just regarding the professional development funds.
Uh-huh.
Did I understand you to say that if all of your schools are Title I, that you can set aside money for professional development there?
Yeah, and those, yes, you could, or even if a portion of your schools were. Now, the goal is to get as much money to the schools, get as much money in their hands as possible. But let's say you had a mentoring program for new teachers, for example, and you wanted to reserve some funds and allow each one of your schools to take advantage of that through the professional development reservation. You would need to definitely consult with your schools on the use of those funds. And actually, the statute requires you to consult on district reservations, period. But you would want to consult with them and maybe get an idea session going of what types of services might be really beneficial to their staff. But yes, you could reserve some funds there.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we're just going to kind of move down the line here. Assessments. You can reserve some funds for assessments. Again, those assessments could only benefit your Title I schools, those receiving an allocation. But if there are some sort of district-wide assessments that you wanted to use, that is a possibility. Administrative costs is an area that a lot of people take advantage of. I don't mean take advantage of in a negative way. I just mean that a lot of people use. There are costs associated with overseeing and implementing the Title I program as a district coordinator. So if a portion of your salary, for example, could come out of this administrative costs. If you spent 25% of your time, for example, overseeing and administering the Title I program, you could charge 25% of your salary here to the administrative cost line. You also might be able to include things as there may be some accounting staff that have to spend a significant amount of time on Title I activities. You could charge a portion of their salary to this particular line item. You might have some materials, printing costs, postage, things of that nature that could be charged directly to Title I through this line item. And again, to get a better idea and some more explanation, you can go to the help pages to read about what types of costs might be allowable here and how the proportionality might work out. This is one item where we do kind of take a heavy look. Sometimes we get into situations where there's a one school district that wants to charge 100% of their Title I coordinator to this particular line item, and we would probably question that. Depending on what we find out, we may ask you to reduce that in that case because the cost may not be reasonable for what is being charged. So again, costs have to be proportionate to the amount of time spent on this project. So if you spend 25% of your time, you can charge 25% of your time here. Costs also have to be necessary and reasonable. Administering the program is definitely considered necessary. And reasonable depends on probably the size of your district. It depends on potentially what other programs you are administering as well. If you were a coordinator that spent 25% of your time on Title I, 25% of your time on Title III, and then 50% of your time in another program or another area, you would need to make sure that if you're charging administrative costs, that they are charged proportionately within those other grant programs as allowable by those grant programs. So you could not charge 25% Title I here when you're really only spending maybe 10% of your time in Title I and another 15% in Title II. So Title I cannot cover other program costs, administration of other programs as well. Just a few other areas in this on this page. Substitute salaries. You can charge substitute salaries for sick and personal leave for Title I paid staff. You can pay a portion of Title I staff's retirement. So if you predict that you will have some Title I funded staff that are retiring at the end of the 2021 year or sometime during that year, you can charge a portion of their salary or of the retirement cost to the Title I program. Now, that cost that you can charge is okay, that portion that can be charged is for their sick pay, and there's actually a formula that we would ask you to follow to come up with the amount that can be charged for that. So we ask that you don't just put a random number in there, but you try to make a reasonable estimate of the amount that can be charged. And the amount that can be charged is proportionate to the amount of time they have spent paid as a Title I staff member. Okay, so these steps will walk you through the calculation of that amount, and we would ask you to keep records that justify this amount. So again, we don't want you putting $5,000 just randomly in this area when the amount might only be $170.40 as calculated by this example. And then last, variations in personnel costs. This essentially allows you to, let's say you have two schools with comparable demographics, comparable staffing. It's just a comparable program between those two schools. At one of those schools, you have more seasoned personnel, and because of that, a lot more of their costs are going to personnel costs. So for that school with more seasoned staff, you can offset some of their personnel costs to allow them to use their funding a little more effectively for other things than just personnel. Again, you can go into this help page. You can get an idea of what we're talking about and some definitions. But again, it just allows you to offset the personnel costs where those costs might be higher in one of those schools. Brenda, let's stop for a minute and see if we have some questions. I thought I heard some coming through.
You did, David, and I need to clarify, going back to district requirements, when I stated that you wouldn't use the 1920 data. Well, with COVID, you would, because we did not do K-Prep assessments. I think what I was referring to is sometimes in an application, it'll say, we met with our stakeholders in the fall of 2018, but we're actually in the 1920 school year. So dates like that kind of catch our attention. But yes, you will be using the 19 K-Prep because we did not administer K-Prep this year. And if you are using successful activities and strategies, you don't need to stop those and replace them. That would continue in those district requirements. I just wanted to clarify that. And then we've had a couple of requests that we separate the consolidated application by grants, and I think we get those requests quite a bit.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time working across the agency talking about that, and at this point, it does not look like we're going to be able to get that separated. That is due to some internal policies and reasons, but we have spent time entertaining that over the last year and a half or 2 years.
Okay, and then I have last year a district was only allowed to set asides for PD for district-wide staff, not school staff. Can you clarify the difference?
Well, it could be set aside for either. What we ask you to do is consult with school staff first. If there is professional development that the district wants to include for its school level staff, that is an allowable cost. However, we would ask you to consult with those school leaders, including the school council and principal, and to really get their input and permission to use funds in that way. Again, we issue district set-aside guidance, and in that guidance, one of the main points was it is the intent of Title I to get as much money in the school's hands as possible so they can make decisions on using those funds in a way that best meets their needs individually. But we did also say that those funds could be reserved potentially if they were reasonable, if they were necessary, and if schools agreed that those costs were what they wanted to do with funds.
And one more,
Okay.
Can you clarify, would indirect costs go in administrative costs?
Yes, you can charge indirect costs to administrative costs. Indirect costs are those types of costs that are really not easily trackable back to the Title I program. They may be costs such as, I don't know, a portion of the electric bill, for example. Those costs could be charged to indirect costs along with other administrative costs that are direct costs. Those costs that can be tracked back, such as a coordinator salary, for example. I do want to point one thing out, Brenda, really quickly, that is related to indirect costs. As you go into your budget and you start building your budget, there's a calculation here that will, as you finish up your budget, allow you to see what the max indirect costs would be. So that is a useful tool. You probably can consult with your finance staff to figure out what the maximum percentage is. Those have not been uploaded yet, but that indirect cost rate will be uploaded here as soon as those are finalized. So you'll know what your maximum rate is. But the maximum cost that you can charge to indirect costs would be right here.
And David, I wanted to mention that other has been removed from district set-asides. If districts had used that category before, it's no longer available, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We have run into in past years some misuse of that particular category, and made a decision to remove that this year. So the goal again is to get as much money into schools' hands as possible, so they can make decisions about the use of funds at their level. That is correct.
I have one more question. Who is going to be the go-to contact for questions concerning CARES Act funding.
Okay, for CARES Act funding, it depends on what the question is. There were some guidance documents issued for allowable uses of GEAR and ESSER funding. In those guidance documents, there were contacts listed at the end of each of those documents. For equitable services, particularly, those questions could come to me. I am the ombudsman for ESSA programs, and the CARES Act designated me as the contact for equitable services under the CARES Act. So take a look at those documents. Those questions about allowable uses in different program areas could be sent to those contacts at the end of the documents. And again, equitable services questions can come directly to me. We will plan on having just a very short spending plan in GMAP for those funds. And we are working on developing that and getting with the vendor right now to get that put in the system.
One more that just came through.
Okay.
New requirements for EL under Title I. Can you explain those requirements?
Yeah, so let me go back to the previous page really quickly. And I'm going to open up the help page. So those requirements right here are kind of laid out for you. There's parent notification requirements, which talks about how students are identified and provided services. So those types of things in that bulleted list right here has to be sent to parents. There's parent outreach that has to go on beyond the parent and family engagement required with the 1%. So those, that's the second requirement. And within our narrative, we're going to ask, we really want to know how you are meeting the notification and outreach requirements and how you're funding those. There are also additional resources down here, including some letters and non-regulatory guidance that might be helpful to you. But these are the main requirements that have to be met under Title I Part A. Essentially, ESSA took some of the requirements under Title III and just moved those requirements to Title I Part A. But a good explanation of those is provided for you within the help page.
Okay, we do have another CARES Act question. Is this going to be a separate application, and would it be due June 30th?
It's probably not going to be due June 30th anymore. And yes, it's going to be separate.
And that's all we got.
Okay. Well, we'll move to the next page. The next page is fairly simple. It is asking you to provide some head counts and full-time equivalencies for staff funded with Title I Part A funds at the district level. So let's say you had, for example, some coaches or consulting teachers, people that go into classrooms and provide professional development directly to teaching staff. And you've charged that to the professional development set aside. You could, or if you do that, you should come over to this next page and enter their head count and their FTE. So let's say that's one person. That person works 25% of his or her time, or 25 or 0.25 FTE. You're going to enter 1 in a 0.25 FTE for that person. Same thing for the program coordinator. Say you've got a program coordinator, you're charging part of his or her salary to the administrative costs area. You're going to put 1, and if you charge half of that person's salary, it would be 0.5. Okay, so again, this particular page is only for those personnel that are paid for out of district reservations. You'll see on the school details page that there are places to indicate people that are paid directly from school allocations. Okay. Anything on that one, Brenda?
No, I think you did a good job on that one.
Okay.
We're ready to move on.
Sounds like one question might have just come in.
It's regarding consolidated monitoring visits, and we might want to tackle that at the end.
Okay. That sounds good. Okay, this page is where some decisions are really some big decisions are made. This page is the beginning of decision making for ranking and serving. And in it includes several different things here. First of all, you're going to go into poverty and low income determination. This is how you're going to collect data and determine which schools are going to be served, or at least part of the process. On this particular page, you have a choice to collect free and reduced data for determining that, direct certification data, temporary assistance for needy families data, or Medicaid data in determining low-income populations for your schools to be served. So once you've determined which data source you're going to use, you're going to check that particular one and enter a date that you're going to pull that data for. The date of data pull has to be a date when school was in session, so students were attending. That can include, in this particular year, a day where NTI was going on, so that's perfectly okay. The second, I guess I should mention, there are cases where people might want to use, for example, free and reduced data and direct certification data. If you have a district that has some CEP schools, so some community eligibility provision schools, and some that are not. In that case, you might use free and reduced lunch data for your non-CEP schools, since you have that readily available. And you might use direct certification data for your non-CEP schools. Now, in that case where you are using mixed data sources, this direct certification has to be direct certified students times 1.6. The reason for that is your direct certified students are a subset of your free and reduced lunch students. So the counts of those students would be much lower than the counts of free and reduced lunch students. So in order to have comparable measures there, you would select direct certification times 1.6. Okay. Again, for some assistance with what those selections might mean, you can go to your current help page or your help for current pages and read about that a little bit. Okay, there's an option within ESSA to prioritize high schools in the rank and order, in the ranking and serving order for those high schools that are 50% or higher poverty. So you can prioritize a high school that has 50% poverty to 74.9% poverty. And you can choose to serve a high school between that range above any other elementary or middle schools or high schools that have higher poverty percentages. Not many people take advantage of that, but it is an option if you are considering serving a high school and that high school has additional needs that might allow you to serve them out of order here. Typically, you are required to serve your schools in order of poverty percentage. So your higher ranked schools are served at a higher per pupil rate than your lower ranked schools. Okay. An additional rule to that is schools above 75% have to be served in rank order regardless of your prioritization here. So if you have 3 schools that are 80, 70, 80, let's say 76 and 75.4% poverty, those schools have to be served in rank order. So their per pupil amounts have to be either the same or the higher poverty school gets the highest PPA. And the next one gets either an equal amount PPA per pupil amount or a little bit lower than that school above it. But in the case where you have schools under that 75% mark, you can choose to prioritize a high school above other schools that would have been higher poverty. Down here, in the next section, you have to tell us how you're going to allocate funds to schools. District-wide rank means you're going to take their poverty percentages and serve them high to low per pupil amounts straight down the poverty line. So you're going from high poverty gets higher PPAs down to your lower schools that get lower PPAs. Grade span rank for anybody under the 75% mark, you can serve them by grade span, which means you separate elementary from middle from high, and then within those grade spans you serve from high to low poverty. Now, if you have under 1,000 students within your district, or you have a single school per grade span, you can choose exception. And in that case, the rank and serve rules kind of fall out the window, so you could serve them in any order. Method of qualification, for the most part, well, let me explain what that is. This is kind of how you're setting your cutoff point for where you are, how low you can serve schools. For example, most people are going to choose 35%. That means that any school at or above 35% poverty can receive a Title I allocation. Some people might choose to use district-wide poverty rank. So if the average of your if your poverty percentage district-wide, the total district-wide is 65%, and you select this particular item, you are telling us that only those schools at or above 65% are going to be allowed to have a Title I allocation. If you are, for example, pulling out grade spans to elementary, middle, and high school, you can use the district-wide poverty grade span average to rank those schools. So if your elementary grade span average was 45% poverty, by marking this, you're going to tell us that in your elementary grade span, you are only going to give a Title I allocation to those elementary schools at or above 45%. Now, using grade span average, you can still use the 35% rule, which would mean you've pulled your elementary grade span out separately, and that you are only going to provide, or you are going to can provide an allocation to schools at or above 35%. If you select the grade span poverty average, though, we would ask you to come down here and tell us your grade spans and what their poverty averages actually are. Okay. The last thing is alternative funding. So the statute allows for districts to skip schools within the rank and serve order if those schools get supplemental funds from some source and they are using those dollars to operate a Title I like school program. For example, let's say Goshen at Hillcrest is somewhere in the middle of our ranking. They have a huge benefactor. Let's say they have someone that's made $1 million donation to the school, and the school has chosen to use that $1 million to run a Title I like school-wide program. Okay, they would enter the information here that shows that, hey, Goshen Elementary is in the middle of our rankings. They have a big pot of money that we're using, that they are using to provide a school-wide program, and that amount is $1 million. Well, if you choose to do that, you could skip Goshen Elementary when you're serving your schools, and you would note that here. If you have multiple schools in that situation, you can add multiple schools. So I'm just going to bet that there aren't many schools out there like that have a huge grant or a benefactor that they are using to serve in a Title I school like program. But if you did, that is definitely an option. There are additional explanations for each of these items within your help page. This help page would help give you some definitions for what each one of those things mean, some general rules around selecting those different categories of ranking determination, explains the alternative funding a little more in depth. But again, this is an area where we see quite a bit of feedback necessary for districts. So we've tried to put in as much information as we could think about for each one of these things within the help page here. Brenda, are there any questions?
Just a few.
Okay.
Some guidance on which one would you use for your low income determination, free and reduced or CEP? What would be the better source?
It depends on what your situation is within the district. If you have free and reduced lunch numbers readily available, you could definitely use those. Direct certification data is within the free and reduced module in Infinite Campus. You could choose to use direct certification to rank all your schools and just not even worry about free and reduced lunch numbers. So it depends on what their situation is really. It depends on how they want the rank and serve to kind of fall out and which of those numbers allow them to do that most effectively.
Okay, so nutrition services received new numbers last week in light of COVID-19.
Okay.
Can those numbers be used, or do we have to use numbers given to us in April?
For Title I Part A, you can use any date. You can pull numbers from any date during the 1920 school year in which students were in session. So if you have prior free and reduced lunch data, for example, from even back in August of 2019, that is perfectly okay to use.
And that's all we have. We can move on.
Okay. So once you have that data selected, here's where you're going to make some more decisions. This is where you're going to start entering free and reduced numbers and enrollment data for your schools. That will determine their free and reduced percentage. That also determines how they fall out in the rank and serve. You are going to select, well, let me just put some of that data in here. Let's say I'm just going to make some numbers up. So let's start with Buckner Alternative. Let's say they want to serve, Oldham County wants to serve that as a school. The enrollment is 200 kids. They're going to figure out what their low-income students are. Let's say the low-income students in Buckner Alternative is 150 kids. They input that data, and it calculates a poverty percentage for them. Okay, if they're using free and reduced lunch, those numbers stand as is. If they had private school kids that would have attended Buckner Alternative School, and that's kind of a weird situation, but let's say Buckner Alternative had a attendance area, and in that attendance area there were 2 children that would have attended that school, and those kids, their parents have decided to take them to private school. They would need to enter that number also. Now that data should calculate on the Equitable Services page, which we'll look at in a minute. Okay, but that number is very important for each school, because it's going to go into determining how much money has to be reserved for private school services, and that money will also have to be budgeted within the budget page. Okay, so let's say they're at 75% poverty, and this school would have to be served because it's at 75% poverty or above, and they would qualify as a school-wide program. Okay. Now that data might be different. Let's say the previous page they selected to use direct certification. Okay. And as a district, they're going to use, they've got a mixture of some CEP schools and some schools that are not, but just for all their schools, they want to use direct certified times a 1.6 multiplier. Okay. What you'll notice is that this number, really just looking at the numbers at their base level, their poverty is 75%. However, this system, when you choose the 1.6 multiplier, will adjust their poverty percentage in this column right here. Now let's say Buckner Elementary School, let's say they're also 200 kids, but their poverty percentage is 125, and no private school kids. Okay. Let's say they use the direct certified times 1.6 multiplier. You're going to notice something in this column. You've got two schools that, according to the direct certified multiplier, both of these schools are at 100% poverty. In a case like that, we're going to ask you to go back, and for rank and serve purposes, we are going to ask you to use this base percentage in ranking and serving them. So we could say they're going to be a school-wide program also, but when we go to the next page to divvy out funds to schools, we're going to use this 75 and 62.5% to actually rank them and serve them appropriately. Okay. It does not always happen that when you use direct certified times the 1.6 multiplier that the adjusted percentage comes out to be 100%. And in that case, let's say this was 75 and 62.5 over here after you applied the 1.6 multiplier, then that adjusted percentage could be used to rank and serve your schools. However, in this case, where you have multiple schools at 100% poverty because you've used that 1.6 multiplier, we're going to ask you to use these numbers to rank and serve schools. Okay. There are lots of other options within the service column, and I'm going to open up the help page to show you that we've defined each one of those for you. Again, your you've got a choice of free and reduced lunch data, just base direct certified data. You may have instances where districts are using direct certified and want to use that plus a household survey to rank students, or you can use the 1.6 multiplier, and the other would be like TANF data or or your Medicaid data, for example. So I'm just going to go to the help page here, show you some of the definitions. We have tried to be as specific as we can with our definitions for each one of those service selections. So, for example, school-wide eligible but no program. In this case, the school's poverty percentage is at or above 40%, and it's above the district's poverty average. If it was selected as a qualification method, this school would be eligible for a school-wide program, but the district is essentially not choosing not to serve that particular school. Now, why these selections are very important is we have to report data to the feds each year about how many types of schools are being or how many schools are being served and what kind of services they receive. These definitions align with what we have to report. So when we start our reporting process, our data folks will go into Infinite Campus, we'll pull the school service selections, and we'll compare that to a report we get out of GMAP. For those that are not in alignment, we will follow up with districts to have them change those selections in this column. And that means that at some point you might have to go back and open up your application, go in and change that service selection, or change it in Infinite Campus, one or the other, to make sure those two reports align. Brenda, is there anything else you want to add to that discussion?
We have just a couple of things for clarification.
Okay.
So when you added the 2 students to Buckner Alternative School, that is because they chose to participate for equitable services. If they chose not to participate, you wouldn't include them, correct?
That's correct. If they chose not to participate, you would leave that number as 0.
Okay. And do we include free and reduced numbers for A5 schools? Last year, I was told to only include A1 schools because they were the only ones eligible for services.
Well,
I was told to put zeros.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
I was going to say, alternative schools like Buckner Alternative High School can be served as a school for Title I rank and serve purposes. It could be served 2 ways, essentially. You can designate it as a school here. A lot of times what you're going to find out is those schools are your high strength schools. But you can certainly do that like I've shown you here in this example. You can enter data if it qualifies for a school-wide program. You can certainly serve it as that. There's another way that an alternative school could be served, and that is by, if you've got 10 students at Buckner Alternative High School, and they all would have attended, let's just say, Oldham County High School, in this case, you could funnel some funds from Oldham County High School into Buckner Alternative High School and serve them with those funneled funds. Now, in that case, you'd essentially designate them as not a Title I school on their own, even though they might be receiving the benefit of those funneled funds from Oldham County High School. Okay, so you could determine that they're not a high school or not a Title I school, but still serve them with funds from those students' school of origin. Okay, but again, the other options are not to serve them at all, or you could serve them as a school in its own if you wanted to do that. Now, if you did that, if you serve them as a school-wide program here, you'd want to make sure that the counts of the enrollment counts and the low-income counts here come from their school of origin, and you would want to remove those 10 students and their data from their school of origin so they're not double counted. So they wouldn't be counted here at Buckner or Alternative and at Oldham County High School, for example. I hope that made sense.
One more. Do we have to pull numbers for enrollment on the same date for public and private schools?
If that data is readily available from the private school for that same date, that would be ideal. If the numbers are not readily available for that date, and let's say you have to collect survey data or you're using some sort of estimation, then the date is not as important. But if the data is readily available and it's available for that same date, then yes, you should pull on the same date.
So A5 schools can be individually served with Title I funds, correct?
They can be, yes.
Okay. All right, that's all we have on this section.
Okay. I'm going to go back just a second to the previous page. And just set something up here. Okay. So the next page is where you will start to figure out per pupil amounts for each one of your schools. What you've noticed here is I've put some information in for Buckner Elementary and the alternative high school. What's carried over here is their low income percentage, okay, and their number of low income students. According to Title I, if we are not going to prioritize that alternative high school, we are required to serve these schools in rank order. So let's say these are the only 2 schools that qualify for Title I services in this particular instance. We've got to assign each of those schools a per pupil amount. Okay, so I'm just going to work on, I'm not going to do this down to the dollar just to show you, for example. Buckner Elementary School is 62.5% low income. Buckner is 50% low income. In order to appropriately serve these schools, we can do a couple things here. Let's say we want to give $100 per pupil to the elementary school. There are 2 things you can do here in this rank and order case. You can serve Buckner Alternative with a lower amount, let's just say $99.99, or you could serve them with an amount that is equal to but not greater than Buckner Elementary. So you could serve them with up to $100. Okay. Now you'll notice over in this column, it will calculate an amount remaining, and I haven't filled that in perfectly. In this case, in order to get it to come out down to the dollar, your amount per pupil should be $2,009.95. Okay, but as you work through this, and you're going to have probably a longer list of schools, as you're adding per pupil amounts, this amount will change. And we want this amount to get down to 0. Okay, so, or as close as you can get it to 0. So as you adjust these PPA numbers, you're going to work through that a little bit, and this number is going to go down. This number is actually the district's allocation minus the district set-asides and minus the private school amount. So in this case, the way I have it set up right now, there are no district reservations put in there, and there are no private school students. I zeroed those out. So in this case, we'd have $429,000 plus to allocate between these 2 schools. And you do that by adjusting the per pupil amount up and down. This number will not always come out to 0. So you might have $4 or $5 left after you've done some work with these per pupil amounts. The easiest way to get rid of that remaining $4 or $5 or whatever it is to go back to your district set-asides and add $4 or $5 in one or more of these categories. Okay, so if I added, let's just say I added $429,000 in homeless, let's see what that does. So that's reduced effectively my remaining balance down to 737. Okay. If I get into a back and forth and I just can't figure out how to get this down to 0, so 737.94. Hopefully it'll let me copy that over. Let's go back over to the PPA list. And now my remaining balance is 0. Any questions, Brenda?
Nope, we're ready to move on, I think.
Okay. Again, additional information is in the Help for Current Pages. We'll give you some definitions and some helpful hints on how to tackle this page. Okay, the next page is just where you are going to you're going to select schools that are served. So Buckner Alternative, for example, you are going to tell us, this is where you're telling us the FTE and the head count for staff that are funded at the school level. So you've got these categories, you've got some others for positions that might not be defined or might not fit in these categories over here. And in the program description, we're going to ask you to tell us essentially what your needs are, what the school's needs are, and how you are tackling those needs. Now, whether they are school-wide or targeted assistance, those descriptions might be a little bit different. So for school-wide programs, we want you to describe these things right here. So address what the areas of instructional need are by grade level, the reform strategies that you're using, and the levels of interventions that will be implemented for students not meeting achievement standards. And if you have any staff that are other, let's say maybe guidance counselor or media specialist, we want you to describe what their jobs are. And really, we would want you to describe in the narrative what the need is for that other position. Targeted assistance is a little bit different. We want to know what Title I supplemental services are provided by each position, addressing identified needs of selected students by grade level, and again, describe the need and the position for the other staff that are paid. So essentially, this narrative for a school-wide program does not have to be just focused on Title I expenditures. And really, we'd like to see it focused on how, through all your funding sources, are you identifying and serving the needs of that school, or how is that school serving its own needs? This, each time you want to add a row, you're going to have to add a row and select a school. But again, the only schools that should be served here are and described here are the ones that are given money in the PPA page. Brenda, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just think you covered that really well.
Okay. Is there a question that just came through?
Nope, we have somebody waiting in the lobby.
Okay.
Get them in, and so no questions on this section either.
Okay. Okay, so in this case, I haven't identified any private schools to be served. So if that is the case for your district, you should see something similar to this, where nothing really is populated on this page. And if you're not serving any private schools, you mark it no participating private schools. However, if I go back to the eligibility page and Buckner Elementary, let's just say they had 2 kids here. If I go back to that page, What you're going to notice is for those two kids that qualify to generate funds for the private school, once I've filled in the low income data for those kids, it has pulled some data over here for us to work from. So the system does a lot of work for you up here. It calculates the percent, the proportion of low income students at the private school. It gives you a per pupil amount. It will give you an amount for professional learning and parent and family engagement. Well, it doesn't give you one here because we haven't assigned any dollars. But also, there's one thing that you might want to consider filling in. If you are serving private schools, you have the opportunity to reserve some funds for administration of those services. So let's say we wanted to charge $50 to administration. What would happen is you would need to discuss that reservation, first of all, in consultation with your private schools and try to come to agreement on what a reasonable amount is. So let's say there's travel involved, maybe there's some personnel time that's involved with serving private schools. You could charge those types of costs to the administration category here, okay? And it takes it out of the available services or available amounts for private schools, okay? Down below, after you've done your consultation with those schools, you've filled out your consultation agreement, you're going to fill in some information on your application. So XYZ private school. I consulted with Brenda. This particular school has both of those private schools, or yeah, both of those low-income students. It will calculate an amount here. How did we calculate the number of low-income students that generate funds? Well, we use the private school low income data. Then we're going to talk about the services to be provided. So let's say we're going to have one teacher providing direct services at 0.1 FTE. We're not going to hire any paraprofessionals to provide services. We are going to identify students using, let's just say, I'm just going to put something in here, MAP and teacher recommendation. And then we're going to provide direct tutoring services. So all these things here you have decided during consultation on what services to provide to the private schools and how to provide them. And you're going to talk about, hey, we have $3,900 to provide these services. What can we provide with $3,900 to meet your needs? So through that conversation, part of your conversation is going to be reflected here within your application. In most cases, there's going to be a very small amount for parent and family engagement. You'll have to divvy those funds out, and that will be automatically calculated for you in the application. Really, the only thing you have to worry about is how did we identify the low-income students that generate funding? How are we going to determine which students receive those services, and then what types of services are going to be provided. Do we have questions, Brenda?
We have a scenario on the school personnel page.
Okay.
So if they are partially paying 2 teachers at one school out of the Title I funds, they put a head count of 2. Yep. And then for the FTE, is one or for both teachers? Is one's at 50% and one's at 60% Title I?
That would be the total for both.
Okay. So they would have 2 in head count, and then what would they put in the FTE?
What are they, 0.5 and 0.6?
Yes, 0.5 and 0.6.
So 1.1.
Okay.
Yep. Oop, you know what? I've got that backwards.
You got backwards. Yeah.
Yep. And then 1.1 here.
Okay, so 1.1, because that would be the 60 and the 50 together.
Yeah, and there is an explanation of that in
the help page.
In the help page as well. Okay. Talks about that up here.
Okay, good to know. That's all I have.
Okay.
At this time.
We're going to go to the last couple pages. The budget page, what you'll notice when you go into your budget page, there are several categories here. The 310G, district and school activities. This is where you're going to account for your district set-asides and your school level activities. You'll budget those there. GM is where you're going to budget your district and parent and family engagement activities. And then you'll do the same thing for non-public schools. You'll describe their instructional activities or professional development, and you'll describe their the parent and family engagement that you'll be providing to the non-public schools. The way you get in there is you hit modify. You can see here, it's going to kind of give you a running total. And if you want to add budget detail, you can go in and manually add budget detail. So what this will do for you is it tells you what category you're assigning it to. So this is going to be for district and school activities. You can assign it to the allowable codes for Title I Part A. Let's just say it's certified services. You can divvy that out by school location, or you can budget similar costs in one lump sum here at the district level. Quantity 1, I would recommend leaving that as 1. And then the cost, you're going to assign a cost to that particular item. In addition to that, you're going to describe what the funds are for. So let's just say teacher salaries at elementary, if that was one of the schools that we served. So for your served schools, you're kind of going to figure out what their activities are in this case, and then assign them to the appropriate accounting codes. Okay. Once you've done that, you're going to hit create, and it's created that budget item for you. Okay. If you want to add more budget detail, you'll hit add budget detail again, add the details you want in there again, and then hit create to create that item. One thing I want to kind of go back and review with everyone is that this amount here in 310G should equal your amount of district set-asides plus the amount assigned for allocations for all of your schools. So if that amount was $1 million, your budget amount should be $1 million. Okay. This amount is should equal to the amount of parent and family engagement that you have. Okay, and I should say that this amount is minus the parent and family engagement. So the parent and family engagement, let's say on the district set-aside, you have $1,000 put in there, then this amount should equal $1,000. And from your non-public schools page, your tutoring activities, your professional development, let's say there's $30,000 assigned for that. This amount should equal $30,000 for those activities. And if there's $5,000 for non-public school parent and family engagement, this budgeted amount should be $5,000. Okay. So there are some checks and balances within the system that if those amounts are not exact, it will redirect you to revisit those particular items. And if you're over a few dollars here, if you're $1,005, it might ask you to revise that to make sure that it accounts exactly for what your district and school activities would be. Okay, again at the top, there will be some information for you about your total allocation, your max indirect cost, your indirect cost rate. Again, we have not loaded those yet. We are waiting on some finalization and approvals for those, but we will get those in there shortly. Okay, Brenda, is there anything you want to add to that?
Not really, other than from experience, when I would have a revision, I would always forget to go back and update district set-asides, and it would not balance. And I would get very frustrated because I couldn't figure out why, because I'd changed it in the budget. And so then I would have to realize, oh, all of those, my previous work has to match that budget.
Yeah, so if you've gone back and made a change in your budget for $5,000 instead of $1,000 for parent and family engagement, you've got to ensure that you go back to the set-asides page and change that amount too. Mm-hmm. Do we have questions coming in for that?
We do not. No questions on the budget.
So I do want to show them one item here, and that's the upload budget data. That is the right button, isn't it?
I think so. That will pull up last year's, correct?
Yeah, okay. No, it's not. It's if you want to, let's see. Okay. It's not showing the button in the test site, I don't think, Brenda. But there is a new function. I'll go back to the GMAP home. There is a new function that will allow you to copy last year's budget data into your budget page. There's some guidance on that up here. And what that will do is it will bring last year's budget into this year's budget, and you can make adjustments from there. The only thing we've kind of run into is, let me get back there. The only thing we've run into with that is you've got to be conscious that that is going to bring in last year's budget, which is not going to equal this year's allocation. So there may be a difference of $40,000, $50,000 if your allocation this year is greater or smaller than last year's budget that you will have to account for. That there's some data here that automatically populates as you're building your data that will show you whether you have money remaining or if there's an overage within your budget. That you know, if you're doing similar activities to last year and you want to copy that over, just be aware that you're going to have to go in and modify those budgets as well, so that the budgets equal out to what's on your district set-asides page and your school and program activities, for example, and that your total budget that you're putting in is equal to your total allocation for the current school year or for the next school year. Anything else to say about that, Brenda?
No, but we've had quite a few people have asked us about an increase this year in Title I, and developing that budget. They're, I think, a little concerned if that's going to hold up. And we do let everybody know it is preliminary, and we don't get the final allocation until October, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. We will actually get, we'll call it a midterm final, and we should be getting that anytime, which we generally do not do anything with that because it's not the actual final allocation. We will go through there and double check to see if there are any significant changes, but the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. Sometime around then we will be notified of what's called the final budget, and we will make some allocation changes at that point, and we'll reissue allocation. So if your budget is finalized and approved before that happens, that's great, because you'll have to go back in and make just a few changes here or there to account for those reallocations. Usually we find that they are a few hundred or a few $1,000s off one way or the other, depending on how our state allocation was adjusted. And in addition to that, I do always warn people that during tight budgets, which we're probably going to be into here, to pay attention to the news, because as you see Congress going through budget deliberations, and there are, disagreements in Congress about what should be appropriated where. We've seen in the past where budgets have been reduced or sequestered around the middle of the school year, around December, and we've had to reallocate again. And then we've seen where they've been restored around mid-February, and we've had to reallocate again. So just have that in the back of your mind. The budgets are preliminary at this time until October, but even then, if you hear about budget fights in the news between senators or representatives, whatever you have, there is a possibility always that budgets can be reduced mid-year. USAID has said once October allocations are finalized, that's it. They're not going to play around with money anymore. It will make adjustments in future years from this point forward, but we'll see how that rolls out. I'm gonna hold them to the word at this point.
Okay, one more. It's a question on CEP ranking. If you're a school-wide program and you use CEP to rank, do you have to use the 1.6 multiplier? Because when they use the 1.6 multiplier, 3 of the 4 schools are at 100%.
You do not. You do not. You can use just CEP number or direct certified numbers at face value. So you do not have to use the multiplier. I know, Brenda, we're about to run out of time, and if you have to go, that's fine. We are still recording, so we'll post this, and you can review the rest of the presentation at a later date at your convenience. We're almost finished here, though, really. I want to run through just a couple other pages that really don't have great significance, but they're there maybe as a tool for you. The budget overview just is an ongoing live page that updates your budget, and you can kind of filter through your budget through budgeted and unbudgeted categories and see where your money is. That's a tool sometimes that we will use at our level as we're going through and doing reviews of applications. Once you've got final approval on your initial budget, there's also a Redline budget page that, as you're going through making revisions, will show in red text where your revisions have been made. You can see you can filter those by budgeted and unbudgeted categories. If you've got different locations, budgeted, you could, you could filter those out by school and so forth. Okay, this page is kind of important. There is, if you are serving neglected students at a facility, we ask you to report some data here about the services that were provided. And the same thing for private schools as well. We ask you to report on the previous year services that were provided. So you'll just manually enter data here. We pull that data again for federal reporting. If neither of those situations apply to you, we just ask you to mark that they don't apply. Okay. Otherwise, we do ask you to input some data for us to run a report for. Related documents. We do not ask for any document other than if you want to provide, if you received a school-wide program waiver for a school that's under 40%, and that went out in the commissioner's email a couple weeks ago, you can upload that documentation here. Okay, if it's not there, consultants may ask you to upload the approval letter or approval email for that particular item. Otherwise, we don't really ask you to upload any additional documentation unless you wanted to upload something that shows that documents a need for something within your application, for example. But it's not necessary unless you're asked for it and you have that school-wide program approval for those schools under 40%. And then last but not least, for those of you that are working on serving private schools at some point, we're going to issue directions on how to upload your consultation forms to the district document library. Okay, so I'm working on that right now, and you should look for some directions soon on how to upload those forms. We do ask that those completed forms be uploaded for each of the private schools that are being served, and I have asked that the entire document be uploaded. So essentially, we're going to provide you directions on how to upload that as a PDF into this system. That is one of the things that our staff will check for, and as well as other program staff, and may get back to you with some questions on at some point. So that's kind of an overview of the highlights and some of the sticking points for the Title I Part A application. We invite additional questions, and we'll stay on for a few minutes if you have additional questions. We also invite you to get in contact with your Title I consultants, and you can find an updated list of who your Title I consultant is from the home page. It's laid out by district. So if you have questions, you can get in contact with them. We'll just advise you that a lot of these staff are fairly new, so they've been here, a few of them have been here several years, but a lot of our staff have been here about a year or less. We are working very closely with them to provide them guidance and helping them address questions. But if you do have a question, it's always good to give them an opportunity to see what that question is. And in most cases, they'll get with Brenda and I on how to answer those questions, and we will provide you with an answer that meets your needs. Brenda, are there any other questions that have come through?
No, I just wanted, we did have some at the beginning, if you were slated to have a consolidated monitoring that was postponed due to COVID-19, is there any updates on rescheduling those?
Not at this point. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to move forward with consolidated monitoring next spring. We did about half of the visits this year, and then, like you said, we had to cancel those visits due to COVID-19. So we're kind of in discussions at this point to see how things are going to fall out. And it's kind of hard to plan right now without knowing what the future holds for us. So we will be issuing some information about that in the coming weeks.
And I don't have anything else on the chat section.
Well, Brenda, why don't we just stick around for a couple minutes, but we're going to just wrap it up and say that if you do have questions, we'll be here for you. If not, if there are other things you want to ask, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We realize that we didn't give you the every in and out of every page. We tried to provide you with a highlight of some of the most important features within the system. We would say always go back and look at that help page. If there's something there that you, something that's not there that you think would be helpful, let us know. But otherwise, we'll stick around for a couple minutes, and thank you for joining us, and we'd love to hear from you soon.
Thanks, guys. We really appreciate you tuning in today.